When a Navy veteran's PTSD Tremor became the punchline at a local diner, a group of construction workers mocked him mercilessly until a massive Hell's Angel covered in tattoos walked through the door and everything went silent. What the biker revealed about the veteran's past left the entire diner in stunned silence. But could one moment of courage really change how we see invisible wounds? The diner sat on the corner of 5th and Market Street, the kind of place that had been there so long nobody remembered when it first opened. The sign outside just said, "Annie's," in faded red letters, and the neon light that was supposed to say, "Open," flickered with a buzzing sound that mixed with the rumble of traffic passing by. It was a Tuesday morning, and the rain came down in sheets, hammering against the big front windows and turning the street outside into a river of gray water that rushed toward the storm drains. Inside, the air was thick and warm, almost too warm, filled with the smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee, and something sweet like maple syrup that had been cooked too long on the griddle. The floor was old linoleum, cracked in places where thousands of shoes had walked the same path from door to counter to booth over the years. The tiles were supposed to be white and black in a checkerboard pattern, but time had turned them into shades of yellow and gray. The booths were red vinyl, patched with duct tape, in spots where the material had split and the foam underneath pushed through. Above, fluorescent lights hummed with that constant electrical sound that you stopped hearing after a while. But it was always there, vibrating in your ears like a note you could feel more than hear. The walls were covered with old pictures, black and white photos of the neighborhood from decades ago when the buildings looked new and the cars had round edges and chrome bumpers. Marcus Webb pushed through the door at exactly 8:30, same as he did every Tuesday morning. The bell above the door jangled, a bright sound that cut through the low murmur of conversation and the clatter of plates and forks. He was 53 years old, but looked older, with deep lines around his eyes and mouth, the kind of lines that came from squinting into bright sun and clenching your jaw against pain you couldn't talk about. His hair was cut military short, gray mixed with black, and he wore a Navy veteran cap that was faded from years of wear. The gold letters almost invisible now. His jacket was dark blue, worn at the elbows, and he kept his hands in his pockets as he walked toward his usual booth in the back corner. The corner booth was what he always wanted, what he needed. It put his back against the wall and let him see the whole diner, see the door, see who came in and who went out. He couldn't sit with his back to the room anymore, hadn't been able to for 23 years, not since that October morning in Yemen when the world exploded in fire and smoke and screaming. His hands shook as he slid into the booth, a tremor that started in his fingers and traveled up to his wrists. It wasn't all the time, but it was often enough. When he was tired, it got worse. When certain sounds surprised him, it got worse. When people stared, it got worse. Donna appeared with a coffee pot, same as always. She was maybe 60, with gray hair pulled back in a bun and a face that had smile lines around the eyes. She'd been serving him for 3 years now, every Tuesday morning, and she never asked questions about the shaking hands or the way he sometimes flinched when dishes crashed in the kitchen. "Morning, Marcus," she said, pouring coffee into the thick white ceramic mug without asking if he wanted it. She knew he wanted it. "The usual?" He nodded, not quite meeting her eyes, and she walked away toward the kitchen, her shoes squeaking on the old floor. The diner was about half full, the way it usually was on a Tuesday morning. A few older men sat at the counter, reading newspapers and eating eggs. A woman with 2 small kids struggled to keep them quiet in a booth near the window. A couple of truck drivers sat together, their high-visibility vests bright yellow against the dim interior. And then there was the table near the middle. 4 guys, maybe in their 30s, wearing construction clothes covered in drywall dust and paint stains. They were loud, laughing big, their voices carrying over everyone else. Empty beer bottles sat on their table, 3 each, which seemed like a lot for 8:30 in the morning. Their shift must have just ended, Marcus figured, night work finishing up with drinks before heading home to sleep. Marcus wrapped both hands around his coffee mug, trying to steady them. The ceramic was warm, almost hot, and he focused on that feeling, that simple thing. The tremor made little ripples across the surface of the black coffee, tiny waves that caught the fluorescent light. He raised the cup to his lips carefully, not wanting to spill, not wanting to draw attention. The coffee was bitter and burnt, the way diner coffee always was, but it was hot and familiar, and that mattered more than taste. Donna brought his breakfast on a white oval plate, eggs over easy, hash browns crispy at the edges, 2 strips of bacon, and wheat toast with butter melting into the brown surface. "You need anything else, hon? You just wave," she said, patting his shoulder gently before moving on to refill other cups and take other orders. Marcus picked up his fork, and his hand shook hard enough that the fork rattled against the plate, a small metallic sound that seemed louder than it should be. That's when he heard it, the voice cutting through the ambient noise like a knife. "Hey, look at that guy over there." It came from the construction workers' table, from a man with a red face and thick neck, pointing with his beer bottle toward Marcus's booth. Marcus kept his eyes on his plate, cutting into the eggs with careful movements, watching the yellow yolk spill out and mix with the hash browns. He could feel the stares now, feel the attention turning toward him like heat from an open oven. The tremor in his hands got worse, the way it always did when people watched, when he felt trapped. His jaw clenched tight, muscles working under the skin of his face, and he tried to make himself smaller, tried to disappear into the cracked vinyl of the booth. "What's wrong with you, old man?" the red-faced construction worker said, louder now, making sure everyone could hear. "You got the shakes? Too much whiskey in that coffee?" His friends laughed, that mean kind of laughter that feeds on itself and grows bigger. One of them, a skinny guy with a tattoo crawling up his neck, slapped the table. "Maybe he's scared of something. Look at him shaking like a leaf." The diner had gone quiet. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The 2 truck drivers at their table shifted uncomfortably, but looked away. The woman with the 2 kids gathered them closer, her eyes darting between Marcus and the loud men. Everyone heard it. Everyone saw it. But nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was that strange thing that happens in public places when something bad is unfolding, and everyone hopes someone else will step in, will say something, will make it stop. Marcus's throat felt tight. His chest felt tight. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright suddenly, buzzing louder in his ears. The smell of grease and coffee turned sour in his nose. His hands shook so bad now that he had to put his fork down, had to press his palms flat against the table just to try to steady them. In his mind, unwanted and unstoppable, came the flash of memory, the boom that shook the whole ship, the screaming of metal tearing apart, the heat of flames on his face, the oil-slicked water full of bodies and parts of bodies, the taste of blood and salt water and smoke. "Hey, Pops, I'm talking to you," the red-faced man called out. "What are you so afraid of? Did you see a scary movie or something?" More laughter from his table, encouraged now by the silence of everyone else, by the lack of anyone telling them to stop. The skinny one with the neck tattoo stood up, swaying slightly, the beer clearly hitting him. Maybe we should go check on him, make sure he's okay. He looks like he might pass out. Donna appeared from behind the counter, her face set in that professional smile that waitresses use when dealing with difficult customers, but her eyes were worried. She walked to the construction workers' table with her coffee pot held out in front of her like a shield. "Gentlemen, let's keep it down, okay? Other people are trying to enjoy their breakfast." Her voice was steady but quiet, trying not to make it worse, trying to give them a way to back down without losing face. The red-faced man waved her off with a dismissive hand. "We're not doing anything wrong, sweetheart. Just having a conversation." "Just wondering what's got Grandpa over there so jumpy." He turned in his seat to look directly at Marcus. "You a nervous person? You got anxiety problems? Maybe you should stay home if you can't handle being in public." Marcus closed his eyes for just a second, breathing in through his nose, out through his mouth, the way the VA counselor had taught him. Count to 4, breathing in. Count to 4, breathing out. It didn't help much. It never really helped much. The shaking continued, his whole body feeling like it was vibrating at a frequency only he could feel. He thought about leaving, about just standing up and walking out, but his legs felt heavy and weak, and he knew if he stood up now, everyone would see how badly he was shaking, would see how their words had gotten to him. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave if you can't be respectful," Donna said, her voice firmer now, but the tremor in it gave away her own nervousness. She was maybe 5'4" and 120 pounds. The men at the table were all bigger, all younger, all drunk enough to be unpredictable. "Or what?" the skinny one said, taking a step toward her. "You gonna make us leave, Grandma?" The other two at the table laughed, but it was forced now, uncertain. One of them, a heavy-set guy with a beard, looked uncomfortable, glancing at the door like he wanted to be somewhere else. But he didn't say anything to his friends, didn't tell them to stop. He just sat there, guilty by silence. Marcus's hands were flat on the table, fingers spread wide, and he could see them shaking, could see the way his whole arm trembled. The wedding ring on his left hand caught the light, gold worn thin from 28 years of marriage to Linda, who had died 4 years ago from cancer, who wasn't here to tell him it was okay, who wasn't here to hold his hand until the shaking stopped. That ring was all he had left of her, that and the house that felt too empty, and the Tuesday morning breakfasts at this diner because she'd always said he needed to get out, needed to be around people, needed to keep living even when it felt impossible. The door swung open hard, hitting the wall with a bang that made half the diner jump. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and motor oil and wet pavement. The sound of motorcycle engines rumbled outside, deep and throaty, vibrating the windows in their frames. The man who stepped through the doorway had to duck slightly to clear the frame, easily 6'4", maybe 260 pounds of solid muscle and old scars. He wore a black leather vest over a dark shirt, and across his back, visible to everyone in the diner, were patches that made people's eyes widen. The winged skull. The words, "Hell's Angels MC," in bold letters. Smaller patches that told stories, military unit numbers, a purple heart pin, places and dates that meant nothing to most people but everything to those who knew. His boots hit the linoleum with heavy thuds, steel-toed and scarred from years of hard use. His arms were covered in tattoos from wrist to shoulder, images that disappeared under his sleeves, and his beard was long and gray, braided at the end with a small silver bead. His face was weathered like old leather, lined and rough, but his eyes were startlingly clear and blue, the kind of blue you see in deep water or winter sky. He had silver rings on most of his fingers, thick bands that caught the fluorescent light as he moved. He didn't look around the diner the way most people do when they enter a new place. He walked straight toward the counter with purpose, his stride eating up the distance in a few long steps. But as he passed Marcus's booth, something made him slow down. Maybe it was the unnatural silence in a place that should have been filled with breakfast noise. Maybe it was the way everyone seemed to be holding their breath. Maybe it was the Navy veteran cap he caught in his peripheral vision, or the trembling hands pressed flat against the table, or the posture of a man trying to make himself invisible. He stopped walking. His head turned, taking in the scene in one practiced sweep. Marcus in the corner booth, hands shaking, eyes down. Donna standing near the construction workers' table with her coffee pot clutched tight. The four men, drunk and loud, one of them still standing, still half-turned toward where Marcus sat. The rest of the diner frozen, watching, waiting. The biker's jaw tightened. Something changed in his face, something cold and hard settling over his features like a mask. He turned away from the counter and walked toward the construction workers' table, and the air in the diner seemed to get heavier with each step. The skinny one with the neck tattoo saw him coming and sat down fast, suddenly very interested in his plate. The red-faced man looked up, opened his mouth to say something, then closed it when he got a good look at who was standing over their table. Up close, the biker was even more imposing. The patches on his vest weren't just decoration. There were military service pins, combat action ribbons, unit insignias that spoke of deployments and firefights and things most people only saw in movies. His hands, hanging loose at his sides, were huge and scarred, the knuckles thick and crooked from being broken and healed too many times. A long scar ran from his left ear down his neck, disappearing under his collar, the kind of scar that came from something sharp and deliberate. "That man," the biker said, his voice low and gravelly, like rocks grinding together, but somehow it carried perfectly through the silent diner. "Served on the USS Cole. He was there on October 12th, 2000. When a suicide bomber in a small boat packed with 500 pounds of explosives blew a 40-foot hole in the side of his ship." He paused, letting the words sink in. The construction workers stared up at him, their faces going pale. He was in the galley when the blast hit, thrown across the room, knocked unconscious, woke up in water that was on fire because fuel doesn't care about physics. It just burns. The biker's voice stayed level, controlled, but there was something underneath it, something that made the hair on your arms stand up. He pulled 3 of his shipmates out of that burning water, 3 men who would have drowned or burned to death if he hadn't gone back in. His hands were covered in second-degree burns. His eardrums were ruptured. He couldn't hear anything but ringing for 6 months. And he still went back in. 3 times, until he physically couldn't anymore, until other sailors had to drag him out. The red-faced man tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The biker leaned down, placing both massive hands flat on their table, his face inches from theirs. His rings clicked against the Formica surface. 17 sailors died that day. 39 were wounded. Every single day for the last 23 years, that man wakes up and sees their faces. Every loud noise, every unexpected movement, every time someone stares at him, his body thinks he's back in that burning ship, back in that moment when everything exploded and his friends started dying. He straightened up slowly, his blue eyes moving from face to face, pinning each man in turn. The tremor you think is so funny, the shaking hands you decided to mock. That's not weakness. That's what happens when your nervous system gets rewired by trauma. That's what sacrifice looks like. That's what happens when you put your body between danger and other people, when you choose to save lives instead of your own skin. The silence in the diner stretched out like a physical thing, heavy and thick, pressing down on everyone. The red-faced construction worker looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. His face had gone from red to white, all the color draining out as the biker's words hit him. The skinny one with the neck tattoo stared at his hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Even the bearded one who had looked uncomfortable earlier now looked sick, his mouth pulled down in a tight line. The biker wasn't done. He straightened to his full height, his shadow falling across their table like a judgment. "Now here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice still quiet but carrying absolute certainty, the kind of tone that made it clear this wasn't a discussion or a request. "You're going to walk over to that booth. You're going to look that veteran in the eye. You're going to apologize for disrespecting a man who has more honor in his shaking hand than you've got in your whole bodies. Then you're going to pay for his breakfast, leave a good tip for the lady you disrespected, and get out of here." He leaned down again, close enough that they could probably smell the leather and rain and motorcycle exhaust on him. "And if I ever, and I mean ever, hear about you or anyone you know disrespecting another veteran, mocking someone's service or their wounds or their sacrifice, we're going to have a very different kind of conversation, the kind that doesn't happen in a nice public place like this. Do we understand each other?" All four men nodded, quick jerky movements like their heads were on strings. They scrambled to their feet, stumbling over each other in their hurry, all the swagger and meanness gone like smoke. They approached Marcus's booth in a tight group, like they were safer together, and the red-faced man cleared his throat twice before words came out. "Sir, we're real sorry. We didn't know. We were being stupid. We're sorry for disrespecting you." His voice cracked on the last word. Marcus looked up at them for the first time, really looked at them, and his eyes were tired and sad, but not angry. He nodded once, a small movement. "It's okay," he said quietly. "Most people don't know. Most people can't know unless they've been there." His voice was rougher than it should be, shaped by years of trying to talk over the ringing that never fully went away. The skinny one pulled a wallet from his back pocket with shaking hands and put two $20 bills on the table, way more than breakfast cost. They didn't wait for change. They walked to the register where Donna stood, left another 20 on the counter, and hurried out into the rain without looking back. Through the window, people could see them standing in the downpour, having what looked like a serious conversation, their heads down, their whole body language different than it had been 10 minutes ago. The biker watched them go, then turned and walked to Marcus's booth. Without asking permission, he slid into the seat across from him, his big frame filling the space. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The diner slowly came back to life around them, conversations resuming in quiet murmurs, forks scraping plates again, but softer now, more thoughtful. "USS Cole," the biker said finally, and it wasn't a question. Marcus nodded. "I was on the Ranger," the biker continued. "Beirut, 1983. Barracks bombing. 241 dead. I was supposed to be in that building. Switched shifts with a buddy who wanted to see his girlfriend." He held up his left hand, and Marcus saw it now, the slight tremor in the fingers, the way they shook just a little. Different war, different decade, same demons. Something passed between them then, a recognition that needed no words, no explanations. Marcus felt his chest loosen. Felt like he could breathe deeper than he had in months. Here was someone who understood, who carried the same weight, who knew what it meant to wake up every day and decide to keep going even when your body remembered things you wished you could forget. Donna appeared with a fresh coffee pot and a plate of eggs and bacon for the biker, setting it down without asking if he wanted it, understanding somehow that these two men needed time together. "On the house," she said softly, her eyes bright with tears she was trying not to let fall. The biker nodded his thanks, and she squeezed Marcus's shoulder as she walked away. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and then they talked, but not about the wars, not about the explosions or the blood or the nightmares. They talked about motorcycles and the best roads to ride in the mountains. They talked about fishing spots on the river. They talked about how the city had changed, how the old buildings were coming down and new ones going up, how nothing stayed the same except the rain that fell every November. They talked about regular things, normal things, the way two men at breakfast should talk. When they finally stood to leave an hour later, the biker reached into his vest and pulled out a card, worn at the edges. It had a phone number written in marker. "We meet up sometimes, few of us," he said. "Different branches, different wars. But we get it. Every other Thursday at a bar on 7th Street. You should come. Bring your stories or don't. Doesn't matter. Just come." Marcus took the card, held it carefully like it was something precious. "I will," he said, and meant it with everything in him. They walked to the door together, past tables where people watched with different expressions now, respect instead of pity, understanding instead of curiosity. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the gray morning looked a little brighter somehow. 3 more motorcycles sat at the curb, their riders waiting, and they nodded to Marcus as the biker pulled on his helmet. The engines roared to life, that deep rumbling sound that vibrated in your chest, and Marcus stood under the awning and watched them ride away down the wet street. His hands still shook, probably always would, but standing there with the card in his pocket and the promise of Thursday meetings and the memory of someone standing up for him, the tremor felt different. Not lighter exactly, but shared. Not gone, but understood. He turned and looked back through the diner window at his empty booth in the corner, at Donna wiping down tables, at the normal everyday life continuing inside. And then Marcus Webb, veteran of the USS Cole, survivor of October 12, 2000, walked back inside to finish his coffee, because that's what you do. You keep showing up. You keep sitting in that booth. You keep living, even when your body remembers, because that's what honor looks like. That's what courage is. Not the absence of fear or pain or shaking hands, but the decision to keep going anyway, to keep taking up space in the world, to keep being present for all the Tuesdays that follow the worst day of your life.